Okay, thank you everyone for coming on again. Good to see a few people who are attending week after week, which is good. Glad you're enjoying the content. Tonight, as you will have seen, we've got Glen Milner with us, who many of you will already know. Probably don't need to do too much of an introduction, but Glen is Vice President at Broadmeadows, also oversees the women's senior program, similar role to Brett Atley, who was with us last week, and as well as coached at Broadmeadows for a very long time at all different levels. So we've got Glen tonight talking about his journey coaching, which is over 40 years now, or 40th year, which is quite incredible. So lots of different things he's learned, lots of players that he's coached have gone to quite a high level. So I won't go too much into what you're going to talk about, Glen. I might pass over to you. Hopefully, can everyone see the presentation? Yeah, that's showing it for everyone. Perfect. Good. All right, I'll let you go from here, Glen. You can run it from there.
Great, thanks, Todd. And thank you to everyone for joining us for this edition of the BBA Coaching Corner. Hope everyone's doing well and finding some relief in the NBA playoffs that have just recently started. So at least there's something to keep us occupied, seeing that, our movement's pretty restricted these days. And I hope everyone's doing okay. Look, I'll be referring to prepared notes as I do this presentation because I don't want to miss out on any particular points that I managed to jot down as I was preparing the presentation. And I guess as you'll see, my coaching history spans some 40 years. So that was a bit of a shock to the system. It made me realize how old I am. But having said that, my memory still serves me well. So I'll put this presentation together whilst everything is still clicking up there. Look, over that period of time, I've experienced many highs and many lows as I've navigated through different competition environments, both from the junior domestic level up to the senior elite level across both genders of competition. My presentation will canvas the most relevant experiences in terms of the learnings that helped me to become a better coach. And I'm hoping that through this session, there'll be something that resonates with you. And at a later stage, obviously, it'd be great to hear from you about tips and traps that at the end of the day can help us all become better at our coaching craft. Now, we spent a little time exploring this slide because it provides context for the coach that I've morphed into over the years. So what got me into basketball in the first place? As someone who migrated from India at the age of 18, when I got here, as soon as they found out that I was from India, they bundled me into cricket and expected me to do wonders at that game. I enjoyed my experience playing with the Bulla Village Cricket Club and playing social squash. But at the end of the day, when I was in my late 20s, I discovered this fantastic sport called basketball when the precursor to Broadmeadows Basketball, which was then the Northern Districts Basketball Association, came into existence in 1978. And as a result of that, there were invitations sent around to various parts of the municipality to field teams. The Catholic priest at Gladstone Park, who was a former basketball tragic, thought this was a really good way to have some community involvement. So he was the one that started a team that entered that competition. And that was how I guess I got roped into wearing my first game out singlet and shorts. Having never played basketball, obviously this was a brand new experience for me, so I had to learn the basics of the game. But what really attracted me to the sport was the team aspect and the fact that in a very enclosed space, every player on the court got to participate. So during that early time, playing in the lower grades of the NDBA and Coburg basketball competitions helped me develop confidence in my competitive skills, while my natural curiosity led me to try and find out about the finer points of the game. And that led me to observe how the game was played at high levels and to delve into a whole range of reference materials, which for the most part written or recorded by coaches plying their trade in the USA or USA college or NBA systems. Because of this research that I was doing into training methodologies and so on, I found myself that I was starting to take the weekly training for the team, and then acting as a playing coach, which, as we moved to high grades, meant that I got to play with players who'd been involved in the game for a much longer period. So my learning of the X's and O's of the game continued on the run. During those early days of player coaching, I recall that zone defense was very much the norm, regardless of whether you played C-grade domestic or A-grade domestic basketball. And I warmed to the 1-3-1 half-court zone as the staple for our teams. We drilled this at our weekly training sessions so that we all knew the movement and rotations in that zone. Packing the paint and only allowing long corner shots, which were generally low percentage, then enabled us to effectively rebound and start our running game. On the back of that sort of pattern and structure, we won quite a few domestic titles. We also employed a 1-2-2 zone, which we played against teams who had effective shooters from those corners. And in those early days, I also developed a sense of, how to have court balance, substitutions, manage substitutions, and call timeouts. As I moved into coaching juniors at the under 10 level and completed a level 1 coaching course, the focus was squarely on drilling the fundamentals of footwork, including stopping and pivoting, and then developing confidence for the players with either hand dribbling, different forms of passing and finishing at the rim, drilling of full court presses, mainly a 1-2-1-1 or diamond and 1 press, and safe movement down the floor, inbounding from the baseline through either a lineup or a stack formation, were also features of the teams that I coached then, which would have roughly spanned about the 1980s decade. It was also in that era that I commenced coaching junior Broncos boys teams. And it was around then that David Chang, who coached the Chinese national youth women's team, joined Broadmeadows as our women's head coach. I attribute my growth as a coach to the apprenticeships I served, learning from firstly David, and then during my appointment as assistant coach of the 1995 and 1996 Vic Metro women's teams that went on to win gold at the Nationals. David brought different training methods to the women's program in terms of accelerated movement on offense by focusing on quick reaction drills, screening and cutting action, and adaptive shooting. To have someone of his caliber involved at the club was a great boost to our knowledge of player development techniques and the standards expected at the elite level of competitions. In addition to having completed the level 2 coaching accreditation, my other light bulb moment came about during my involvement with the under 16 girls state teams. Working with Linda Guerin from Bulleen, I learned the importance of consistent messaging and training routines, and also in terms of gameplay, trusting your gun players to win the game. World Championships MVP and Opal stand-up Penny Taylor was a member of those 1995 and 1996 teams, state teams. And in the 96 final in particular, I remember turning to Linda and saying, listen, we've got to sub Penny out of the game because she was being manhandled by the Vic Country team in the semi-final. And she was virtually on the verge of collapsing on the floor. And I said, listen, we better get her off, otherwise I think we'll be held liable if something happens to her. But Linda insisted that Penny had the endurance to see it through, and she was right. You know, Penny played the game out, and at the same time, she scored the points that got us a win. So even back at those early stages, you could see that a player like Penny Taylor was always going to be someone who would make it to the very top of her game. I also highly recommend that you find a mentor or mentors who can assist you in your coaching journey by being a sounding board, or who can suggest that you consider an alternative approaches to training, game style, personnel relationships. One of the people that I regard as my mentor was a guy called Terry Pritchard, who was involved with the CYMS teams, and then he was at the Bulleen and Diamond Valley, And Terry was one of the old-style characters who was very well read on the sport and was always able to come up with something that would help you modify your game plan or react to a particular style. Terry was very supportive during the year that our under-18 girls won the state championship. He was, as I said, very well read on all things basketball, and he introduced me to the Bob Kloppenberger SOS Pressure D system, a system that I still use to this day. Now, Kloppenberger was the defensive, and Cecil might remember his name, but Kloppenberger was the defensive coach for the NBA team at the time, the Seattle Supersonics, and he put together this whole system, which was, quite, I guess, revolutionary back in those days, to where it was switching everything, applying maximum pressure to keep the ball on the floor, etc. Terry was also strong on change-ups on defense, and he had this quirky alignment of in the half court playing, half on this side of the court you played man-to-man, the other side you played zone. So depending on where the ball was, the team that was playing against a team that was involved in that quirky defense didn't know how to react. So whilst I didn't quite adopt all of those quirky things, what I certainly took on board was the fact that change-ups were useful, and that's something that I've always had in my back pocket as I've gone on my coaching journey. So what didn't work? When you first take up coaching, I'm sure a lot of first-time coaches will probably relate to this. The temptation is to always have something new in training, or to give your players a fresh outlook, or to see if a new drill produces a desired result. I learned the hard way that consistency in teaching skills and game style provides much better dividends in terms of players understanding and playing out the key points of emphasis, which in turn then increased our chances of winning. The other lesson learned was the timing of messages. In the half hour before tip-off in our under-16 girls state championships preliminary final in 1995, I made the point that we should give this game everything, as this was the final season the players would play together as under-16s. Instead of this being a motivational teaming together moment, it turned out to be a disaster, as the girls were all emotionally caught up in that thought and were bounced out of the finals. What worked during this period was my commitment to creating teams that enjoyed each other's company. We did this through lifestyle exercises such as how well do you know your teammates. So you'd give a line about a teammate, and without obviously identifying them, and people then had to try and guess who that person was. And that then indicated as to the extent to which people were interested in each other. So that was a really useful exercise that I often employed with my teams. Social outings, which also involved the parents, was another good way in which to create that level of chemistry and understanding. And it was also very important to clearly articulate our team values. So why do I coach? The reasons I coach are the love of the game. I just fell in love with the sport, 40 years ago. And I've constantly, I just constantly, just follow what the latest trends are, want to read as much as I can, want to learn as much as I can about it. And then that desire, then, that love of the game then translates into teaching the game so that others can also love the game for the benefits it provides. Not only in terms of the contest, but for life, such as teamwork, building resilience, understanding sacrifice, growing self-esteem, and following instruction. Watching a player execute a practice skill during a game, celebrating a player's first basket, sharing a winning result as the fruits of players' hard work, are all reasons that have kept me tied to the game that I'm passionate about. In terms of the championships that I've been involved with, I've always been of the view that Broadmeadows teams punch above their weight. We don't have access to the large numbers and talent that other more established associations have. So we've relied on having a coaching cohort that is committed to self-development with a view to giving the players we select for our team the best possible chance of success. Starting with our junior domestic competition, where the building blocks of the fundamentals of the game need to be taught and reinforced, enables players to graduate to the representative level at the standard that they are ready for at that time. Given the size of the talent pool we have access to, our coaches are probably more tested than those of other clubs, as we need to teach and implement a style of play that will make our teams competitive. We particularly struggle with access to bigger, dominant, paint-dominant players. So our game style invariably tends to focus on full court defensive pressure, causing turnovers and scoring through fast breaks. When we come up against talented teams that can break that pressure and execute well on the half court, we then need to be even stronger with our defensive principles so that we can keep opposition teams to scores that we can match. So we need to implement a defensive framework that disrupts the flow of opposition teams, takes away the ability to dominate us in the paint, and at the offensive end, be very confident with a mid-range scoring game. So that's the approach I've taken when building the style of play for teams that I've coached. While it helps to have talent, it's even more important to have a shared understanding of the points of emphasis in our defensive and offensive execution. The 1997 and 2001 under-18 girls state championships were won on the back of pressure, man-to-man D, with a change-up to match-up zone at times. So for example, we would play man after a no score and zone off a score for periods to keep our opposition guessing on what they should run against us. We ran a continuity offense to take advantage of the strengths of our players who were drilled to understand where the options for scoring came from. And we also prepared by practicing dribble and pass penetration using receiver principles, the precursor to split kick and extra pass movement practice these days. In 1997, with only one state rep player on our team, we beat Melbourne Tigers with 5 state players in the final. The 2001 success came after winning 3 elimination finals against Melbourne, Bulleen, Dandenong, and then defeating Nunawading for the title. Those titles and many other club successes over the years definitely confirm the axiom that our teams punch above their weight. The club's remarkable run of Big V Women's Championships in 2007, 8, and 9 came about through the benefits of keeping together a core group of players from around 2005. That, together with a commitment to pressure D principles, willingness to play for each other, and to find opportunities to connect outside of basketball, were key to the success enjoyed during those times. The really satisfying aspect of those championships was that 60 to 70% of the players on those teams were homegrown Broadmeadows juniors. And that's further testament to the teaching methods that had stood these players in good stead when playing for these titles. I'm particularly proud of the achievements of the 2007 and 2008 teams because they progressed into the then Australian Basketball Association national playoffs, defeating clubs from South Australia and prominent Seabull teams like Nunawading that had current Opals captain Jenna O'Hay. Reaching the ABA title game in 2007, after beating Seabull champion Bendigo without injured stars Sharin Milner and Elise Benaluna, was a great club memory as it put Broadmeadows in the national spotlight. My mantra during much of the period when I coached at the senior level, including during our Big V Youth League women's title in 2015, was around the themes of choice, collective responsibility, and challenge. Now, I can't take credit for coming up with those terms because Coach K from Duke actually had about 5 or 6 sayings similar to those, but I've plagiarized some of it and then put my own take on it. But those 3 themes, those 3 markers were on the whiteboard before every game we played. Choice reminded each player that in the heat of battle, their individual reactions are tested, whether from a referee's call, a turnover that went against them, or the coach's decision about playing time. How the player responded was a factor in how that reaction impacted the game and their team. So it encouraged them to make the right decision, to choose the right decision in those circumstances. Collective responsibility was a reminder that this is a team game, which the scoreboard reflects by having the team names against the score. So it's not, a particular player versus Nunawading or Dandenong or Diamond Valley. It's actually Broadmeadows versus them, or Hume City versus them. And it also provided the opportunity to emphasize particular aspects of our defensive approach and offensive sets that were relevant to the preparation for that game. Finally, under the challenge heading, I emphasized the standing target we had per quarter, which was to hold our opposition to 12 to 15 points, whilst we aimed to score 15 to 18 points. Again, something, quite realistic, and nothing that was, beyond the realms of what might be achievable. Depending on what part of the season we're in, the challenge framework could also include things like, let's even the series against that team, or let's win the series against that team. The teams I coach seem to respond well to this reminder format, which I also used to good effect when I coached the Hume City men's team in 2009. While the club has continued to enjoy finals appearances on a fairly regular basis in recent years at both the senior and junior levels, the challenge continues to be to get the most out of our local playing population, again in the knowledge that we're not drawing from an extensive talent pool. With the focus on consistency of direction and teaching methods through our junior representative program, thanks to Cecil Exon's leadership, and supported by Steve Paz and Clarissa Tomlinson and the concept of age-specific lead coaches, we're doing the groundwork to prepare our champions of tomorrow. The addition of quality senior elite level coaches in Brett Attlee, Matt Foster, Dee Butler, Kevin Fleming, and Tim Devlin, and their influence on our graduating juniors will also consolidate the value system for Broadmeadows basketball around playing the game the right way. My coaching journey has seen firsthand the shift in generational expectations of involvement in the sport. In the 80s and 90s, exposure to the sport at the elite levels, for example, the state club championships, NBL and WNBL, was generally through attendance at games, even though free-to-air TV coverage, particularly if the NBL had gained momentum, and players of the ilk of Michael Jordan, and everyone will remember that Be Like Mike saying, also attracted kids to the sport, and the focus on coaching and player development increased as the popularity of the sport boomed. Kids could see a pathway, and parents found this alternative of a team sport, safer than the AFL, to be attractive. During the 80s and 90s, for juniors especially, parental expectations pushed talented kids to the more established clubs or those having state rep coaches. My observations of the player movement then resulted in many talented kids not reaching their full potential, as their reasons for changing clubs was more related to what was in it for them than actually learning how to play the game of basketball the right way. While player movement for those selfish reasons still happens, I think that clubs like ours are connecting better with parents and players through skills development and more knowledgeable coaching so that our value proposition retains those players. I've moved across the various modes of communication in line with generational trends. In the 80s and 90s, I used to provide players and parents with written notes regarding team values and training exercises. And I found that as over time, people wouldn't read those things as they became used to different means of communication and platforms. So during the early 20s, communicating moved to platforms of email and text messages, and we're now in the age of shared Facebook pages for information dissemination. As long as you're able to stay in touch and be relevant, it doesn't matter, I don't think, with as to what the preferred mode of communication is within your teams. Motivation is a tough one because every player has their own reasons of signing up to the game. But at the end of the day, signing up a common set of expectations, and team values has the benefit of bringing players and their parents to that framework if disagreements arise based on their own value system or self-absorbed motives. So now I'm going to throw it open so we have a little bit of interaction from the group. And I'd like to know from you guys, how would you define a successful season for the teams that you're coaching? So it's over to you.
All right, so you should be able to unmute yourselves if you'd like to give a response.
I'll go first, Glenn. I'll throw myself under the bus. I always, I've only golfed for 2 years back at Broadie now, but if all my kids want to play again next year and have improved during the season, then that's a successful season for me. As long as there's been team and individual improvement and they all want to come back and try out again next year, then I think that's successful.
Terrific. Thanks, Simon. Anyone else? You can unmute yourselves. Any other views as to how you assess a successful season?
I'll go, Glenn.
Yes,
so I think it can depend. So you can either go off accolades and you can define that as a successful season. So for our senior teams, that's kind of how they're defining their success. Are we winning games? But I think maybe for say like my own team, I think it's have I made a better person out of that athlete? And I think that's how I'm going with under 18 boys, because it's like, am I sending better people into the world?
Yep, great, excellent.
Glenn, I'll have something for you.
Thanks, Russ.
I look at success as making sure the kids come back with a smile every week. They enjoy everyone's company on the court, being around the club, not wanting to go to other clubs, as you and I know that there's a lot of clubs out there that try and take always our better players. But I look at it as if we can keep them in the club from under 12s right up to under 18s youth league, that's our success rate, I reckon.
Yep, great, Russell. Good point. Thank you. Any others? Okay. All those are absolutely great points, and I'm glad that not glad, but I guess you know one of the things that you hear sometimes coaches talk about is, well, you know, did we have a winning season, or did we win a title, or did we do this, or did we do that? You know, it's measured in terms of some very sort of empirical data. Whereas I think it's definitely more important to assess a season based on, you know, how your players have developed, not only as basketballers but as people, and you know, have you been able to achieve a level of improvement that is going to carry through for those players into the next phase of their basketball journey. So what I've got down here is, you know, what a successful season should look like should be agreed at the start of the season, then measured against those expectations. And in terms of sort of technical things, you might say the lower age groups, one measure could be that, you know, each player can make a layup with either hand. For older age groups, it could be the players understand how to read and react to screens at the offensive end of the floor. As a team, it could be that you want to finish above your grading position, etc. So, you know, they're little markers that you can use from time to time, but definitely the value that you get a player to get to, I think, is one of the most significant contributions you can make. Okay, so this the key roles of a coach. I mean, this is kind of a textbook somewhere, and most of you will be familiar with you know, the broad-ranging responsibilities of a coach and what their obligations are to bring out the best in their players. So you've got, you know, planning an organization. I hope people can read that reasonably well. So planning an organization is obviously a key component, being a motivator, being a leader, obviously, setting the right value systems and understanding or conveying that to your playing group. Being a teacher as well is, that's what you're on about. And also being a trainer. So, I mean, again, those are the key roles of coach. And look, I'll make this presentation available to Todd. Todd, when you put it up, you can put this on the system so people are to copy things down. If they want to, they can access this as much as they like. This next slide is about, I guess, an example of how I prepare for a training session. And as the lead coach for the under-16 girls, the Sunday trainings that we used to run before everything went virtual, is the sort of format that we adopted and prepared, and then gave that to the other coaches, and then we ran groups that practice these things. You've heard the expression, practice makes perfect. Well, I'm a great believer that perfect practice makes perfect. So it's really important that in those training sessions that you pay attention to detail, that you continue to correct, to make sure that things are being done the right way. Because at the end of the day, people need to be able to execute in the heat of battle. You don't want them starting to think about how they should pivot. It should just happen automatically. Crossover dribble should happen automatically. Reverse dribble should happen automatically. They don't have to think about these things. It becomes instinctive so that, they're ready to make the next move rather than having to struggle with, their ball handling load. So for what it's worth, that's an example perhaps of, how you could structure, a training session and the points of emphasis that you want to have in moving your players through each of those different skills areas. And for those of you that might have been wondering what I was talking about, but I said the SOS defensive system, well, that appears in this training slide here with SOS being set on smother, so that's on ball defense. And the SOS off the ball is about snuggling and then staying off your man and then striking when the opportunity presents. In other words, diving to the passing lane. So, some of the terminology obviously is old because that's what Bob Poppenberger did back then. But if you understand how those things happen and then you teach that to your players, then your players will understand. If you call a player and say, hey, listen, you really didn't run that snuggle tight enough on your player, and that's why she got open. So you need to pick up on that. Or in the off position, have people got to the split when they should have. Have they rotated when they should have? So as I said, it's important that these things are drilled in a way that the people understand what they're talking about. So if I talk to our team, they understand that their set position wasn't great on the ball, that they allowed that player too much of a gap, that they were able to see a passing lane rather than getting them to put the ball on the floor and fan them away from middle. So anyway, for what it's worth, again, you can have access to that and have a look at it and see if it's of some value to you. Okay. So into the vital home stretch now. We can see the winning post coming up. So here the lessons learned and being learned. So it's not in any particular order, but here's a summary of what stuck with me through this coaching journey. Settle on your formula for success, but at the heart of it, defense has got to be a priority. If there's anything that I've learned from winning those titles and so on, it's that a team that's well drilled in defensive principles and understands what pressure is about, where we want the ball to go, where we dictate terms and don't have the offense dictating to us, then we give ourselves a chance to win. So it's really important about understanding what the identity is for your style of play. And as I said, look, it took me a while to settle on a framework that I was comfortable teaching and drilling. But once I did, I'm now very clear on what I think will lead to success. I think it's really careful to be careful about using emotive language close to game time. Provide your key motivational messages at the last training session before the game. Then remind the team of the most important points of emphasis of your style of play. An example that turned adversity into opportunity occurred during our 2008 Big V State Championship Grand Final Series against Waverley. At that time, both teams were really very talented. Waverley had gone and recruited a lot of WNBL players. Kath McLeod was playing for them at the time, Larissa Kavanagh. So they were pretty formidable. Even though we finished on top of the ladder that year in the best of three grand final games, Waverley won the first game on their court. So all they had to do was win one, and then they had the title. So for that following weekend. So at a team dinner that we organized on the Wednesday before that weekend, I gave our players a questionnaire that covered our achievements that had led to us being on top spot of the ladder. And the final question was, what time do we play Sunday? So, immediately that starts to get your team thinking positively that, hey, this isn't the end. We know how good we are. And yeah, we're looking forward to a Sunday game after a Saturday game. And we never looked back from that point, and we had convincing wins for our back-to-back title that year. The next thing is about building relationships. So know your personnel, know what helps them and what hinders their performance. Ask about things that interest them outside of basketball and pay attention so that you can build on those interests. Tournaments are also great for bonding, as are small projects that you can assign to the players to report back on. Just gets them thinking, get them out of their comfort zone, and gets them to share. We had I don't know whether Chan's on the Zoom call, but earlier this week we had a Zoom meeting with our under 16 girls, and one of the things that we did was we said to them, listen, let's have a little debate about who's more important to the game, guards or forwards. And after they were a little bit shy to start off with, but then they started getting stuck into each other. It was a good-natured take of a topic, but at the end of the day, would always lead to the position that we're a team. So everyone's talents have to combine, but it also then gave us our entree into letting them know a little bit of history about the game, because I think that's important as well. So when we asked them about who are two most recognizable forwards and our two most recognizable guards from Australia, they didn't know. So we had to sort of tell them a little bit about Michelle Timms and Christy Harrower, and then we had to talk to them about Penny Taylor and Lauren Jackson. So these are the things that I think, especially these days in the generation that we have, that it's important that they understand what can lead them to the greatness that some of those players like Jackson and so on achieved. You need to be organized. So I know people obviously are aware of that. Be clear on your points of emphasis, plan your training sessions and review that. And that previous slide was an example of how a training session might look like and what you're trying to achieve through that. Really important that if you can, find a mentor and regularly check in. Coaching can be quite stressful when you take accountability for team performances. I know I've had restless nights after a loss in an important game, reviewing what went wrong, what could I have done differently. Your mind races like crazy, and then you then start to second guess yourself a bit. So it's really important that you're able to debrief and reset. And I think it's also very important that if you can have an assistant coach or coaches, they also perform a very similar role in that they're there to support you and be able to talk about the things that you can share the experience, which I think is really important. You got to stay up with up to date with terminology, both basketball related and contemporary social talk. And in that, I'm sort of, this applies both across juniors and seniors. But if I look at the language these days of drive fakes, throw downs, punch and drag screens have replaced the old terminology of jab step, onside and crossover dribbles, back picks, cross screens. So it's important to communicate in these terms to our athletes, especially juniors who might be invited to state camps and will need to know how to respond to these terms when the coaches direct them to do things. And it's also with juniors in particular, but even with seniors, I found that you need to stay up to date on contemporary shows. What are teenagers are watching? What are they attracted to? What's the music scene looking like for them? Other trends, because it's important to be able to talk to them in their language and in their terms. So even though I might be an old dinosaur, I do keep across these things, and I do surprise some of the players that I'm involved with by knowing some things about what's going on. So it's, and that all helps to building that chemistry that's so vitally important if you're going to, see success come through. And finally, the knowledge that I've acquired over the years has come through viewing coaching videos, online modules, attending clinics, and extensive reading. But it's important not to have too wide a menu from which to choose, because otherwise you can be distracted and not settle on things that you feel are really important for yourself. So the best advice I can give you is to know yourself and trust yourself and be yourself. So I'll open up for questions now.
He's very, very quiet. Don't all jumping at once. I've got a question. Nice. I've started now. Glenn, you mentioned a few players that you coached that had gone and played at a high level. Put you on the spot a little bit, but could you name an all-star 5 of players that you've coached at some point? Probably on the women's side, I guess.
An all-star 5 that I've been involved with.
Players that you've coached at some stage.
Sorry?
Players that you've coached at some point of their career.
I've coached.
An all-star 5.
So Penny Taylor has got to be there. Natalie Porter's got to be there. In terms of point guard, Sharin would probably make it, I would think, seeing that she has been a WNBL champion and was invited to an Opals camp. In Elise Benaluna, who's another one that's come through the system and that I coached, and Gabe Richards. So that's a pretty formidable starting 5, I would have thought.
Very solid, yeah.
Mm.
Now you can go, Sarah. Sorry.
Yeah, Glenn. Do you think that any part of the game's going backwards? Do you think kids are, maybe compared to back then, do you think we're not doing anything right? Whether that be containing our players, shooting. Do you think we're lacking in any area?
Look, I have to say that I would still like to see a greater emphasis on defense and defensive principles, particularly in the half court, and being able to disrupt teams that have taller talent than ours by ball pressure, fronting posts, being on the split, ready to help on that catch, all those sorts of things, and then doing doing those rotations off that, because. As the old saying, defense wins titles and offense, sells tickets. So it's and especially I think with our Broadmeadows teams, we're probably again, we need to focus on our mid-range game in terms of shooting and scoring and stuff, so that. If we drive into the key and we've got these big monsters ready to block us, well, we've got to be able to have a pull-up shot that's has a much better percentage than just jacking up threes. So mid-range, teaching the mid-range game, and certainly an emphasis on pressure man-to-man principles with your feet pointing towards the sideline, fanning away, and hedging to help one pass away, so that you don't give up the open shot by committing, overly playing defense up the line. All those little things that kids need to be taught. That then, but as they move through the system, and when you get them at the big V level, these are already locked in, and then all you're trying to teach is a particular emphasis about how you might want to run your offensive sets, for example. Okay, but yeah, I would have thought that certainly defense is a point of emphasis for us.
I'll go again. So, do you, with juniors especially, would you teach them to hedge to help let the on-ball defender recover, or are you a switch guy?
No. If there's an on-ball being set, then we would usually want to blitz the dribbler. So we'd come out and we'd if somebody was setting an on-ball screen, I'd want to have my screen defender actually come out hard to show, and the on-ball defender himself or herself would come over the top, and the two of them would actually force the dribbler away, and then you'd recover back to you'd have obviously your split line help, but you'd recover back to the roller quickly, and you have to have active hands. Your hands have got to be up there so that, in that situation, if the guard wants to throw the ball high, you have a deflection possibility. Or alternatively, if there's going to be a bounce pass, and that's a slow pass that can be anticipated. Did that answer the question, Simon, or were you talking about something else?
No, that's about it. Yeah, I try to not let the kids switch. I try to teach them to fight on defense and help each other and recover rather than switch. So I was just seeing if I was going down the right road. Yeah.
So I'm not. I don't switch. I look at blitzing the dribbler, okay, and then recovering back. So once the dribbler is dribbled out and has to give the ball, once the dribbler dribbles out, then the original defender stays with that, which stays the dribbler, and the big then recovers back to the defender. But you've got that help, you've got the extra help at the sideline, at the split line. Make sense? Okay, thanks.
Hey, Glenn, it's Chan here. I was just wondering, is there anything that sort of in hindsight over the 40 years you'd do differently or change if you had your time again?
I think it's a constant learning experience. Well, even now, I'm constantly open to new ideas and understanding how there might be nuances in the way that, you run the flow offense or how you adjust to the team that you're coaching, those sorts of things. I still learn. I mean, Chan, I still learn from you, your views about things as well. So, and I think I've listed, in the, what worked, what didn't work in that column, in that section about things that, I hadn't done as well as I would have liked. But I learned from that, and then you make the adjustment. So there's not any one thing I would say, Chan. I think over the journey, certainly in my sort of self-improvement as a coach, I've looked for opportunities to be exposed to new learning experiences. That's what led me to being part of those state teams back in 95, 96. And going to coaching clinics and all those types of things, and also learning off some of the coaches we've had at Broadmeadows, some of the elite sort of senior coaches we've had at Broadmeadows, and even the players that we've had. So yeah. So no, there's not one thing I'd sort of say I regret as a major sort of thing. It's just a lot of blocks along the way where sometimes sometimes they've worked, sometimes they haven't worked. And when they haven't worked, hopefully I've learned a lesson that that has meant that I wouldn't make that same sort of mistake again.
Glenn, it's Danielle.
Thanks, Glenn, and thanks heaps for the presentation too.
That's all right. Thanks, Jen. Yes, Danielle?
I wanted your opinion as an older ex-player, and I've had the comment made by many other returning parents in the last couple of years about the speed of the game.
Speed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As in, what, slower now or faster than when you played, or what? Sorry?
We're frozen on us.
I think we rely far more on athleticism, and I'm wondering do you think it's because that's the game, or because coaches aren't focused on skills?
It's a really interesting point. I mean, I think we've always, well, over the course of my journey at any rate, there have always been clubs that have had the luxury of being able to select athletes within their programs. Look, Nunawading is a prime example of that, where they pick a bunch of athletes, they can run the floor hard, they can press up the floor, and so on. But I always believed that if you got Nunawading in a half-court game, they were all at sea, because as athletes, all they were ever taught, and I mean the same thing with Diamond Valley and so on, they're taught to use their athleticism to disrupt play, and then to finish with transition baskets. Okay, so if you're able to break that pressure and then get them into a half-court game, then you improve your chances against them, because they play at that sort of breakneck pace and so on. Oftentimes, and this will probably get back to the big clubs, and they'll have all these Facebook nasty things said about me, but oftentimes, I think that if you train and drill your players the right way, they understand the game better than if it was just a running game up and down all the time, right? And with people, because they're athletic, they could make mistakes and get away with it. Whereas with our kids, we don't have that level of talent. I'd like to think that, as I said, we always punch above our weight, because I think we're smarter in the way that we play the game, because we know that our kids aren't as talented. So we have to put in systems and structures that we think they'll be able to cope with and make them competitive. And I think that's key. It's there's always been athletes, and right now, yes, we do have athletes as well, but the understanding, I think, of the game is different. And whilst I'm on that, I'll quickly sort of tell you my 2 penneth worth of this free-flowing motion stuff that people keep pushing all the time. And again, I've always been of the view that if you had a team 5 days a week, like you do in the college systems in the States, and so on, you could teach players read and react stuff. You can drill them until it became second nature to them. We don't have that luxury. We train kids twice a week, okay, for an hour and a half, or whatever it might be. So my philosophy has always been, look, I think we need to, yes, do a little bit of that read and react stuff, but then we need to put them into some sort of framework, a structured framework, where they understand, once they've caught the ball, what they might be able to do next. So I just think that for our purposes, we need to have players play within a framework, and not just a loosely defined, passing, cutting, driving sort of game based on decision making. That's that takes a long while to actually instill into players, so they know the right decision to make in the right circumstances.
Thanks.
Thanks, Danielle. Anyone else? Any other comments? Look, again, happy to, if you want to email me, Todd, I'm happy to put my email address as well in there. And if you want to maybe have a chat with me, you get my number off Todd, and happy to give you a call and answer any other questions that you might have, or to provide you with some anything else, any other guidance that I might be able to assist you with. Very happy to do that. But if we don't have any other comments, then I guess I can wrap it up by wishing you every success in your coaching journey. And thank you very much for being a part of this session.
Thank you, Glenn. Quickly before we go,
Thanks, Glenn.
Plug a few things real quick. So Sunday we've got skill sessions. So if you can let kids know about those, 10:30 is the beginner one. 11 o'clock is the advanced one. We've got Joe Wright, who many will know, 17-year coach, I think, in WNBL, who's going to run that session, which is going to be really good. So we'd like to see a lot of numbers there. Next Wednesday, we're doing a nutrition session with the same people who ran last night's one set one. And then sometime next week, I need to chat to, actually, if Cecil, Clarissa and Steve can hang around after this, we'll have a WNBL coaches meeting one night next week, just looking at next season, whenever that is to begin, and what we're doing there. So we'll get that info out to you guys. But apart from that, thank you for coming along, and hopefully we'll see you guys at the next few sessions. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe, stay well. Cheers.